Good morning. I'm Jim Levinson, Dean of the Yale Jackson School of Global Affairs. I'd like to welcome everybody and, of course, a special welcome to the President. President Arce's lecture is our annual Sunrise Foundation lecture. Funded by the Sunrise Foundation, the lecture features prominent speakers who come to speak on themes related to political and/or economic issues in emerging markets. And the Sunrise Foundation also provides fellowships to deserving graduate students here at Yale from emerging markets enrolled at the Jackson School. The title of President Arce's talk is Emerging Economies in Latin America, the Bolivian Economic Model. President Arce has been president since November of 2020. He has served in the Bolivian public service for the entirety of his career, beginning with the Central Bank of Bolivia. He has served as Minister of Economic Affairs and Public Finance under Evo Morales for almost 14 years. As minister, he successfully managed the Bolivian economy in a period of unprecedented growth and poverty reduction. From 2006 to 2011, GDP grew by an average of 4.6% per year, peaking at 6.8% in 2013, and quite impressively, at the same time, unemployment decreased, inflation fell, and poverty was dramatically reduced. A pretty incredible record. He was elected president in October of 2020 with a majority of the votes. I will note with special pride, and I speak here for both Professor Caliendo and myself, President Arce has also taught economics and finance at various universities. Today's talk will be moderated by Professor Lorenzo Caliendo. Lorenzo is the Juan Park Hahn Professor of Global Affairs and also holds professorship at the School of Management. Lorenzo serves as Jackson's deputy dean and is himself from Uruguay. So Lorenzo will start us off with some questions, and then we'll open it up. I also want to extend a welcome to those who are joining us, as this is being live streamed to many, many around the world. President Arce, thank you so very, very much for joining us here at Yale. Lorenzo.
That's after acting that introduction, I think it's President. Why don't you actually give your talk? You were thinking about actually talking in the podium, or you want to do it sitting from here?
I think there's.
That's great. So why don't you first? Why don't you start, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning to everybody. I'm very happy to be here. Professor James Tobin University. I will always have followed all the writings that he has done and all the research that he has. So for me, it's a pleasure to be here in this university. I would like to start just because I think the time is the worst that we have in the world. So I would like to talk very briefly about what is our model is, the principles, the basics, and also it is very important for us the results in the both fields, economic and social results, which is very important because at the moment we create this model in 2005 with Professor Carlos Villegas, who was working with me at the university at the time. We have to fail with the neoliberalism model who was in place in Bolivia for 20 years. Since 1985 to 2005, 20 years of neoliberalism in Bolivia, and there were no alternative models to face or to replace the neoliberalism one. So when we started to do that, it took many years to develop this. we have to face many problems, and you will see a graph which we will compare, what the neoliberalist model against our model, were the most important differences and results of each one. So I will start very briefly talking about the basics of our model, which we call economic, social, communitarian, productive model. And we have to put it those words because it's a very long name for a model, but it is important to say that at a time we have to emphasize that the economic policy should be and is always a social issue. Economics is mainly a social science because we have to solve the problems of people. And the neoliberalist model, the market models, don't take into account many times the social issues. So that's why we call it economic, social, communitarian, productive model. And also communitarian because we recover from the indigenous people the principles as solidarity and other principles and values that the indigenous peoples have, and survive to the neoliberalism in my country. And productive because we are changing the Bolivian people's mind, because we would like to become a productive country rather than only trade or only services. We would like to have a productive country, which is another way to do it. So that is the basics of what we put that long name. And the basics is that a country should grow based on the natural resources a country has, getting economic excellence from them, and which is very important because we are the antithesis of the natural resource cost theory. You remember in your lectures. And we demonstrate to everybody that a country who has natural resources can develop based on the natural resources, which is very important for us. That's why at the beginning of our government with President Evo Morales, we put in place the nationalization of hydrocarbons and other resources that now, under the new constitutions, is under control of the state. That's the main issue there. Secondly, we generate economic surpluses, excellence we call it, in order that the state appropriates of this excellence, this surplus. And why the state has to be here, and that's the big issue at that time. I think still in many countries the debate that if market economy or the state in the economy. We sorted this problem in 2006 because we were appointed that the state has to be in the economy. It's a very important role of the economy. It has to be related to the state and not to the market, because the market, it's not a equilibrium in the market. When normally there is no equilibrium in the market. And normally in the market are two players, offers and demanders, but one of them is always winning. It's not an equilibrium in that market. So for us it's very important that the state has to be, has to appropriate it to get the surplus of the economy in order to do the third basic of the model, which is redistribute it. The principal role of the state has to be to redistribute it, because we are facing now, and there are many books, Mr. Piketty is doing a good job there, trying to understand the inequality in the world. But who's going to resolve the inequality? The market? No. From our point of view, the market never will solve the problem. Who is going to be the solver of the problem is, of course, the state. So, generate surpluses, excedents, the state appropriates it and redistribute. Why we would like to redistribute income surpluses in the economy? Because we want to resolve the inequality and the poverty that we're facing in 2005. So that's the principle. It's very easy. When you look at the models, and Professor Tobin shows us in a very good manner in many researches, that the models have to be very simple in order to succeed. And the principles of our model, as you can see, it's very easy. To generate excedents from the natural resources in my country, redistributed among people by the states to resolve the problem of poverty and inequalities. That's it. That's the model in a very easy way and very short way. That's the way our model works. On the left-hand side, we have the natural resources. We have hydrocarbons, mining, electricity, all the strategic sectors. We get the money from those sectors in order to redistribute them. The state is in the middle of it, receives the money on the surpluses and do the redistribution process, not only generating a new country, industrialized country with industry, manufacturing and so on, generate income, employment and so on, but also, as you can see it in the bottom of the graph, you see the income redistribution and poverty reduction process, which comes from the income, the resources that we can generate in the surpluses from the natural resources. That's it. It's very, very simple, the principles that our model has. And in this one, you have some of the differences with the neoliberalist model, which was in place in Bolivia since 1985, as you can see it, up to 2005. And in the right-hand side of the graph, you see the economic, social, communitary, productive model, which was two phases of it. One from 2006 up to November 2019, which where we suffered a coup d'etat in Bolivia. The neoliberalist model came again, wrongly from my point of view. And then when we restart our model in November 2020, when I became the president of my country. We restarted, and of course we have good results, you will see later on. But those are the principal differences, The first one is the most debated one, which is the free market against the active presence and participation of the state in the economy. That's the debate, And it's a long story. In economics, it's a long story about that. But in our case, in a less developing country where we have many indigenous people, poverty, inequality, industrialized country, and so on, for us is a solution that the state can resolve this problem. And that's what we have done so far. One of the interesting things is that the neoliberalist model, and now every time we are looking at even every year is less dependent, but at the beginning, what the neoliberalist model used to say is that in order to grow, a country should export. We have a president in Bolivia who used to say, export or die. That was the the beginning of the neoliberalism in my country. And in my country, we just die trying to export. So what we have done is to change the engine of the model. Instead to be the external demand, should be the internal demand. We should base the growth on people, because people need to get better life every day, become better days for everybody, and that is consumption, that's investment in a country, not working for other countries. So those are principles I would say more important in order to resume the main ideas of the model. Now, we turn in some results that many of them, of course, are in the IMF, World Bank report, and many international institutions. The first one is the growth rate. You can see in the average growth rate from 1985 to 2005, it means the neoliberalist model. The growth rate was 3% on average. And in our government, in the first government, 2006 and 2019, 4.7%, we increase very clearly the growth rate. And of course, here, 2019, and 2020 about the COVID-19 and so on, the pandemic and so on, affected, of course, all the countries, and it is we have a decrease in for 8.7% grade growth. So, we were one of the countries in South America that have, the worst economic performance at the time, when the neoliberalist model became again in the government who gave the coup d'etat in Bolivia. Now we are increasing at 4% is the growth rate estimated for this year, and I think we can do that better. We will see what we are doing. Another thing is that many times, for 6 times, we haven't put it in the screen now, but Bolivia was in 6 times the first growth economic rate in the region. Some of them you wait 2014, 2018, 2018. But of course, if you look at 2020, when neoliberalism came again to Bolivia, we were almost the last one in growth rate, but with a negative one, So it means that our model used to have better results than when we were in the neoliberalism again. And this is very important. We divided the growth rate in Bolivia for the source of this growth rate. If you look at the blue bar, it is the internal demand, which this graph shows you that the internal demand is very important to give us the growth rates, which it means internal demand means consumption, means investments in my country, which are the main issues that are driving the growth in my country, which is very clear with our model, the theoretical issue of the model. The internal demand is driving the growth rate, not the external demand, which is the exports minus imports, which is the external demand, which is also negative for us and many times. And in those years where we benefit from the exports, of course, it works together. The external demand plus the internal demand succeed in increasing the Bolivian economy. This another one shows us a very important thing for us, because at that time everybody look at our government as a socialist one, and everybody, scared about the socialism, and they say socialism will take off from you all your goods and so on, and there will be no private enterprises, because the socialists, what they want is to keep everything for the state and no private enterprises at all. That's what they used to say. And this graph shows you that in our government, under our model, the private sector increased much more than they even did in the neoliberalism model, which of course shows you very clearly that is absolutely compatible with the private sector, because it's very easy to understand that. When the public sector invests, it is like a train that all the cars afterwards are pulled by the state. Everybody, when the state invests, there is a multiplier impact in other sectors, private sectors, and that's why you have the impact. If you look at 2005, only 74,000 private enterprises were in Bolivia, and now we have more than 355,000 private enterprises working in my country. So it is very clear that we have an impact also in the private sector with our model. The per capita GDP, which is very important. We started in 2005 with only $1,000 per capita income. Now we are $3,037. So we multiply by 3 the per capita GDP in our country, which is very important, as you know. The inflation is not a problem in my country. Even now, accumulated inflation rate from January to August is only 1.6% of inflation rate. Even in these years, when we all know that the inflation is a worry for everybody, especially here in the United States, in Europe, very worried about what's going on with the food prices, with the energy prices and so on. And that's not a worry in our country, because we have the lowest inflation in our region, and maybe would be in the lowest, one of the countries which has had the lower inflation in the world, I would say. So it is very important, because we are taking care about poor people. Our model takes care of poor people. We look for them. We try to do everything for protecting all the poor people who lives in my country. That's why inflation is the worst thing for poor people. Because rich people, they know how to protect them. But poor people, they don't have instruments in order to protect from the inflation rate. So that's why we take care of the inflation. The trade balance has improved in this year. From 2021 to 2022, we have positive numbers. In the past, we were looking at negative numbers in the trade balance. But now we are improving, because we have a policy which substitutes imports. Import substitution, we call it. The import substitution process we put in place in November 2020, and it's giving us good results. We are improving exports, but also we are reducing imports, showing that Bolivia has a big and enormous, I would say, production potential that we are using now in order to reach these figures, as you can see in the graph. Savings and number of deposits is very important. Look at the flat savings in the financial system in the neoliberalism model. From you have in the graph here in the left-hand side graph. In 1997 up to 2005, in the neoliberalism model, almost flat the the savings of people, and the saving started to increase with our economic model. And we have from 5,000 billion US dollar, we have now 31,000 billion. So we have a lot of increase in the saving. People have more money, that's what they say. And also in the right-hand side graph, you see the increase of the loans and the number of accounts. It's very important, this number. We started in 2005 with 1.9 thousand of accounts in my country, and now we have more than 14,000 of accounts. It means that more people now have more deposits at the banks, which is very important in developing countries because it means that not only they have money now, but the income they have, is more than the expenditures they have, so they have a margin of saving. And those savings now are increasing in the deposits and in the number of accounts as well, which is very important. And when we divide it, we would like to see if the money that is the number of accounts and the money that is getting in the bank belongs to rich people or poor people. We look at, we divided in the right-hand side graphic, the people that has less than $500 deposited in the banks, and so on, at more than 5,000 US dollars deposited at the banks, and you will see that 87% actually in Bolivia of the accounts belong to people who have only 500 US dollars or less deposited in the bank at the banks. So it means that we have democratized also the economy, the money. Now they have accounts, and more people that have accounts now at the banks are people that have less resources, less income. That is very important because it shows us some of the results of the redistribution model that we put in place. The loans, the financial system loans also increase, as you can see, and the non-performing loans are very, very low, comparing with what happened in the neoliberalism period. So if you look at 1997, 28, even we have 16% of non-performing loans. But now we have only 2% of non-performing loans, even in a period where we faced the pandemic and everybody used the savings at the banks in my country, and also they didn't have money, and so they didn't pay the debts, the loans at the banks because they didn't have money at the time. So even though we have only 2.2% of non-performing loans in my country. Also, this is very important, the Bolivianization process. In the neoliberalist model, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who was the advisor of that government at the beginning of the neoliberalism in Bolivia, put in place a dollarization process in order to face the hyperinflation we suffered in 1992 to 1984, more, where we look at an inflation rate of 21,000%, 21,000% of inflation, of annual inflation rate. So when we became government in 2006, we started to do many policies in order to de-dollarize the economy, and we succeed, as you can see in the graph. In the past, in the neoliberalism model, only 5% in the financial system were deposits in our domestic currency, which is el boliviano. But now we have 85% of people is depositing money in domestic currency. And also in the loans, in the neoliberalist model, 7% of the loans were made in domestic currency, and now 99% of the loans are made in our currency, demonstrating the confidence of people in our currency and our policy and in all the results we were getting from our model. And now we don't have problems with the dollarization in the economy. We are doing very well, and people, trust in our domestic currency, which is for monetary policy, very important. If people don't trust in your currency, you cannot do any monetary policy at all. So it is very useful for us to recover the monetary policy from the dollarization process that the neoliberalism did in the past. Of course, Professor Sachs now is not a neoliberalist professor, has changed his mind, fortunately, I would say. But at the time, he advised this kind of dollarization process. The global and current fiscal balance get better if you look at in the neoliberalist process, all negative. We have more or less 9 years of surpluses, and then we started to have again a fiscal deficit. We were recovering from that, and then again the coup d'etat came in my country and started to do bad, wrongly economic policies. We have almost 13% of the GDP as fiscal deficit. It's an enormous one, And we started to reduce it. Now we are looking to have 8 and 7% and so on. All these years we are going to recover those figures in this fiscal balance, but you can see it easily what happened in the fiscal sector. It is very important here. Since we have put in place the neoliberal, the economic, social, communitarian, productive model in my country, which is our model, we changed the source of funding of our public investment. In the past, the public investment came from mainly external resources, debt, external debt, basically. Now, the 2/3 of the investment, the public investment in my country, come from the internal resources, and you can ask yourself what's going on. Why we change the source of the funding of the investment, the public investment in my country? And the reason is that when you recover your national resources, you have money. You have money. That money that in the past were going away. We keep the money in my country and started to invest the money that came from the national resources. That's why a huge change in the percentage of funding, or the source of the funding of the public investment. Public investment, by the way, is one of the key issues in our model, which is very converse what it comes from the neoliberalist model, where the base of the neoliberalist model is, of course, the private investment. In our model, the state is the main actor there, so the public investment is the main issue for us. That's why it changes. We invest more as a public sector, and we have results, as you see, and that's why, because we recover all the natural resources and so on, we recover the source of funding our investments. The medium and long-term public debt is not a problem in my country since our model. But in the past, as you can see, you have the ratio external debt against GDP. You can see that in the past, there were many years that this ratio were more than 50%. But since our government, since our model, we change it, we reduce it, because we increase the denominator of the equation and reduce, the ratio, and now we have only 28% of the ratio between external debt against GDP. So we're more comfortable now with the figures, macroeconomic figures, as you can see. We increase the national minimum wage. In Bolivia, we have a minimum wage for everybody. Nobody has to earn a salary, a wage, less than that. And here, I think we have in US dollars, yes. If you look at to 2005, 54 US dollars, it was the minimum salary in my country. And now we have more than 323 US dollars. So in this time, we have increased a lot the minimum wages in my country, so people is getting more money. And if you look at the figure, comparing the figure between our countries, Bolivia in 2005, we used to have the lowest minimum wage in all South America. And now we are just in the middle, and if we continue with this model, I think we were getting better year by year. The unemployment rate also is a success for us. We used to have 8%, almost 9% of unemployment. In our government, applying our model, we had more or less 4%, 4.4%, 4.2%. And, now we have 5.2, but in 2020, we have 12% of unemployment rate, under the pandemic. It was very, very worried about that. But in any case, unemployment is also a variable that shows you that we have improved a lot. And still, there are some to do in this variable, but I think we succeed also in reducing unemployment. Also, when we look at the social results, we have here how we reduce extreme poverty and how we compare it with all the South American countries did in the same period. In the left-hand side graph, you will see that we received the country with 38% of extreme poverty in my country, and we reduced it up to 11% last year. Even last year, we reduced it much more than we did in the past. So it means that the model is working again, And when we compare our results with all the other countries in South America, that of course all the countries are trying to reduce the poverty as well. If you compare it, Bolivia reduced more than everybody in our region. We reduced in 20%, 27%. Peru, for example, reduced it in almost 12% in the same period between 2005 and 2021. So it means that our model not only succeeds in getting good macroeconomic results, but also has good social results, which is an advantage of our model that the neoliberal model cannot appropriate, cannot talk about, because they never reach both. Also, the income inequality by Gini index, we reduced it. We were a very inequality country together with Brazil. We were the worst in the region in 2005. We have 0.60 of Gini index, and now we are only 0.42, which is a huge reduction. And again, when we compare our results from those that the countries in South America get, it's very, again, Bolivia reduced it in 0.15, and all the other countries reduce it less than we have done with our model. Taking into account that many countries still they are using the neoliberalist model. This is another very important thing, the structure of the social stratum, the composition of people according to the income. In 2005, 60% of people in Bolivia were in low-income conditions, 35% in middle-income conditions, and only 4% in high-income conditions. Now, when you compare, we have 36% in low-income in conditions. We reduce it from 60 to 36, and we have increased the middle-income people from 35% to 60%. Almost we double the figure from 2005. So we have reduced poverty, we have increased the income, especially middle income, and this is not only our figures. I will show you some World Bank figures later. Also, we reduced the differences between the richest 10% people in my country against the 10% richest, poorest people in my country. When you compare the richest 10% against the poorest 10%, we have a difference of 128 times in the past. But now we have only 20 times. Still, some job to do. Yeah, we are completely agree. But we have reduced a lot, especially in the rural area. People who live in the rural area, they reduce more the inequality among rich people and poor people. And as I promised, here is the World Bank. This is a picture of the World Bank. They issue a report where it says the income growth, the poorest 40% of the population who do the best in order to reduce some improves for the income of the poorest 40% of a country. And you see here, Bolivia, we have marked at the top, is the country that increase the income of the poorest 40% better than any other country in the world. In the world. It is a World Bank picture. It's not our picture, it's the World Bank picture. We, according to the World Bank, we increase the income growth of the poorest 40% in 12.5%. You know, Peru did, let's say, 9%, 9 and something percent, and so on. So Bolivia, according to the World Bank, is doing better in improving the income growth of the 40% of poorest people in my country, comparing with all over the countries in the world. So those are results. And the last picture I have for you is this one that is very important for us, which is the expectancy, the life expectancy at birth. Bolivia, if you look at the, let's say the blue bars, we have a 64 years old of life expectancy in 2005. Now we have increased it to 74 years. And you have all the countries there in South America, but in the picture that is in the bottom, you will see comparing all the increases in life expectancy in the region. Bolivia has increased almost 11 years of life expectancy, which is the highest increase in the life expectancy in the region. For example, Brazil increased in 5 years old in the same period, but Bolivia did in almost 11 years. So that's why, I'll finish it with this figure, We say that our model has succeeded not only in the economic side, but also, more important for us, in the social side, because if we have a more equal country, we have a better country, a better fed country, better healthy country, we will have more and better results and a better society. That's the objective when I say at the beginning of the model. Reduce the poverty, what we have done, and reduce the inequalities that also we have reached with this model. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think it was a very enlightening conversation and hypothesis about the Bolivian, basically, I would say, new paradigm in terms of think about growth. I have a set of questions that I'm actually going to start asking the President, but I do want this to be a conversation. So in the sense, if people have questions, please raise your hand, and I'm going to give you the chance to basically ask a question. But let me start basically first. So it's fascinating, and clearly this is, the data speaks by itself, right? Thinking about when the new, let's say, economic model that you have proposed, because you were the Minister of Finance during this period, right? So with Evo Morales, in the macro, if you see the macro numbers are quite impressive. Lower inequality, lower unemployment, lower inflation, and at the same time, more resources collected from the government. These resources coming from, as you were saying, the resource-based aspect of the economy. So I guess I have questions about thinking about the long run. So how do you think about, so first, lessons. What are the micro lessons? I'm going to be asking that in a second, but more thinking about the long runs. How do we, a country that like Bolivia, that really depends on the prices of commodities. So clearly you were saying about importance of the internal market, but these resources are global. When you're thinking about lithium, when you're thinking about other commodities in the world, they're driven by global supply and demand. So how do we make this model sustainable in the long run? So I'll give you an example. Chile, which has been an exporter of copper for many years, they have basically adopted a fiscal rule to basically guarantee somehow like a level of spending that it's not fluctuating with the commodity prices. Another example is Uruguay. No surprise, I'm from Uruguay. They're also just adopted a fiscal rule. We don't have a resource-based economy as the case of Bolivia. There's other resources that Uruguay basically produces, but we do get fluctuations in commodity prices, and that can explain a big component of these macro imbalances. So I guess moving forward, and I apologize for the question, it's more a challenging question, which is...
Very good question, I would say.
Sorry?
I would say it's a very good question.
Thank you very much for that. So what do you think? How do we generate something that's sustainable more in the long run, let's say?
Rules not always work. What happened with rules and those kind of, ways to manage the economy usually break down very quickly, because they are not prepared for faced crisis like this one, for example, and they broke the rules. And those rules, for example, European Union, it was 3% of the fiscal deficit. I don't know this year how they will work. But anyway, the better rule is the rule that is flexible, in my point of view. And in order to answer your question, which is a very good question, the long run, in the long run, we have to industrialize our national resources. We have to increase the production of food, the agriculture sectors, we have to improve it, in order to have no import dependence at all. And that's what we are working on. If you look at what happened in this crisis, for example, fertilizers, agrochemics, and so on, went up, and everybody cried. And food raised prices, and there were not food all over the world. Everybody were looking where to buy food. What we have to do is improve the agriculture sectors, to improve productivity, to become less dependent, at least if not totally independent from the imports of inputs, seeds, and so on. Because everybody is looking for seeds for everybody, and that's the problem. That is the problem. In my country, we have started to face this problem, to do some policies in order to avoid this problem in 2020, when I became president of my country. We started to issue policies. We started the import substitution process, policies we put in place, and so on. That is the difference. We have these results rather than all people that was, trusting on the globalization, trusting on imports and free market and those things that never worked. Because when there is crisis, nobody is your friend. Everybody is looking themselves. And that's why we are facing this problem. So, agriculture. If you don't have last model cars, it doesn't care, but if does care if you don't have food. So that's the first thing that the world has to do it. In our case, the countries which have a natural resource, they have to industrialize it as soon as possible. And of course, in our point of view, according to the respecting the Mother Earth, ecologic development, which is very important. It's most costly, but we have to do it. Rich countries didn't do it at the moment. At that moment, we have to do it. So, in our countries, it's much costly to become a developed country, but we have to do it. We have to develop all their natural resources, respecting, I say again, with Mother Earth. Then you have to invest in education, you have to invest in health, you have to invest in many things, yes. And that is the long run.
Yes.
That is the long. If you have food,
yes,
and you have education, you have investment technology, you have a long-term growth rate.
This is great. This is great. He's talking about sources of growth, and this goes back to the textbook economics model. So human capital seems to be important. Of course, investment, private and public investment. And I guess what we're learning from Bolivia is more like, so we know the ingredients, the recipe, it's a very local recipe, the Bolivian way of doing this. Anyone has a particular question we'd like to ask? Yes, please. Why don't you, yes.
Thanks, Mr. President. I'll start out. My name is David Alzate. I am from Quito, Ecuador. I'm a master's student here at the Jackson School. Thank you again for being here. Congratulations on your economic policies, the stability and growth that your country has experienced, especially in this post-pandemic recovery period, and especially for your focus and commitment of improving the lives of those that are most in need, of the poorest households in the country. My question relates to an apparent contrast, perhaps, between your foreign policy and your domestic economic model. So domestically, as you've explained today, you wish to prioritize improving the living conditions of those most in need. However, in your foreign policy, you do recognize and support the regime of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela. Is this not to you an apparent contradiction to support a regime that has been responsible for the largest amount of human suffering in our contemporary history in the region, a country that now 76% of Venezuelans live in extreme poverty under less than $1.90 a day? So how can you claim to support, in general, improving the lives of the poor while also supporting the regime of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, actually, we don't support any government except us, all right? What we do have is good relations with everybody, even with the United States. Even with the United States. We don't, we don't have bad relations with the European Union. European Union and many countries, participate actively in the coup d'etat in 2019. but we still have relations. Bolivia is a country who always will maintain good relations with all the countries. That is our foreign policy. We have good relations with Chile, for example. We have a huge problem there about the sea, right? But Bolivia is always not supporting. We don't support any government. We have good relations with the governments. So it's a difference. We respect the autodetermination of the nations. If they want to do what they want to do in their country, it's their problem, not our problem. We have to respect the way they decided to live, decide to do elections or not elections, or whatever regime, political regime they decided to adopt, you know, the economic policy they decide to do. We live in a country where there are many countries that are applying, still they are applying, and the university are they still teaching the neoliberalism model. And we respect it. I mean, it's a way. It doesn't mean that we support them, you know. I think we have to live in a world where we have to respect each other. That's the best way, I would say, to live in peace and with everybody.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me ask a question, going back to your presentation, and we can ask someone else basically wants to ask a question. So I guess something that was quite surprising to me was in the model that has been working, let's say, in Bolivia, this idea of obtaining resources from what used to be from the private sector now belongs to the government. The idea of the resources. Where do we get this resource basis on natural resources? So the question is, but at the same time you were showing a lot of firm entry data that actually firms have been actually going up over time. So I guess one would actually, as an economist, basically maybe would say in priori, one would expect something on the contrary. If it is the case that the government is collecting rents from firms, that will disincentivize firm entry and firms investing in the country. So how did this happen? So I'm thinking about learning. Is it in different sectors? How come we are still generating incentives for firms to invest and enter in Bolivia when at the same time you're telling us that some of these resources actually are now collected to go to the government and the people?
Okay. Well, we differentiate. We differentiate. If there is an international enterprise that like to come to Bolivia to work and own the natural resources,
like the land,
for example, or mining or hydrocarbons, the Constitution says that at least 51% has to belong to the state. So we can make some business, but in national resources, more than 51% has to be for the state. You know, that's one of the restrictions. In other sectors, tourism, services, industry, whatever, you don't have any limitation. You can go and have to 100%, whatever, no problem at all. But for the national resources, we have a restriction very clearly in the Constitution.
Very, very, very interesting. Anyone else would like to? Yes, please.
I have a question, and if I may, I will say it both in Spanish and English.
Yes, I mean, I was doing it in English, pero podía haber hecho también en español, por supuesto.
Sí. Hay audiencia
bilingüe, por supuesto.
Hispanoparlante. My question, I really appreciated you mentioning Mother Earth. I think it's a very important concept that is not discussed enough. And being Bolivia such a rich country in natural resources, what has been the main challenge to respect Mother Earth? Le pregunto al presidente Arce, primero comentando qué bien que me parece que el concepto de madre tierra para los recursos naturales, y cuál ha sido el reto más importante de su gobierno para respetar a la madre tierra.
I answer in Spanish or in English?
Let's start in English and then we can maybe switch to Spanish.
Spanish or English?
Oh, you choose.
Well,
I think some people would like to hear in English also, but
okay. Well, Of course, for every developing country, the worst problem that we're facing is the cost of technology. We would like, for example, to produce clean energy. But clean energy is very costly. That's why you always, in the international forums, we say that developed countries should sell us. We don't want that they give us that as a gift, but they should sell us at very low prices the technology in order to develop our countries respecting Mother Earth, because it's very costly to do. For example, roads. You should, taking into account the cost, you should build a straight road. But in the middle you have, a natural reserve, whatever, you have to go around it. It's most costly, And who give us the money for that? Nobody. And everybody says in the world, everybody has to respect Mother Earth, everybody, but it's costly. It's costly. And it's much costly for us to develop in this kind of circumstances. But I think this is the main issue, the cost of the technology, the cost of developing, that the developed countries should take into account in order, to make policies in order to respect, to avoid some crisis that could be in the ecological scenarios and so on.
Very interesting. No. Why don't I go? Yes. I don't know which one to do.
Buenos días, señor presidente.
Sí, está bien. Good morning, Mr. President.
Yo tengo una pregunta escuchando su presentación. Bolivia es un país indígena. Y vemos este crecimiento económico increíble que ha venido desde el 2005. ¿Cómo se puede encontrar un balance entre el mercado y las necesidades de los pueblos indígenas? Muchas veces parecieran no ir en la misma ruta, sobre todo en discusiones de mercado que ponen a pueblos indígenas como no querer el desarrollo o las ideas del desarrollo que vienen desde el occidente. Entonces, ¿cómo han encontrado en Bolivia este balance en el mercado? ¿O podemos hablar también de economías indígenas?
Esa es muy buena pregunta. En realidad, en nuestro país, el mercado, la economía de mercado estaba matando a los pueblos indígenas. Porque los pueblos indígenas, especialmente en nuestro país, no tienen el concepto del mercado y del desarrollo en base al mercado. Ellos sobreviven. Pero llega un momento en que en la Constitución Política del Estado han sido empoderados, han sido visibilizados, y por eso es que en nuestra Constitución tenemos, primero, 4 fuentes de economía: la economía estatal, la economía privada, la economía cooperativa y la economía comunitaria. La economía comunitaria. En esa economía comunitaria el Estado participa activamente en su desarrollo. Lo primero que se está resolviendo es el tema de tierra-territorio, porque los pueblos indígenas lo que siempre han peleado es por un espacio, tierra-territorio. Tierra para producir y sobrevivir, territorio para poder vivir como ellos originalmente han vivido. Entonces, el Estado está poniendo las condiciones para que esos pueblos originarios puedan vivir en su tierra y territorio. Y ahí entra la economía comunitaria para poder enlazar la economía comunitaria, como ellos la manejan, como ellos la han vivido durante toda su vida, con órganos o con mecanismos de mercado, de Estado, de cooperativas, que pueda interactuar con todas las partes que están en la estructura económica de nuestro país. Esa es la labor del Estado. Hay un ministerio en nuestro país que es el Ministerio de Desarrollo Productivo y Economía Plural, se llama. ese ministerio es el encargado de hacer esas interfaces entre estas diferentes formas de economía con los pueblos indígenas.
Super interesting. Clearly, very important question, and definitely the answer. I guess we have time maybe for one more question.
Sure.
That's okay, or
One more question.
that's okay. So yes, I'm going to give. Sorry, she raised her hand before. So yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. President. This was an online chat. My name is Maria Jose Ramirez. I am Mexican and I'm a first year MBA student. I'm also going to do a combination of the Spanish and English, but mainly my question is about the public management of natural resources. Specifically nowadays, lithium is very important. And as you may know, in Mexico, corruption is a good topic, how to manage publicly these natural resources without falling into corruption. So I would like to listen to your take on how to have this economic surplus within the government, but also guaranteeing a profitable and transparent management of the resources. So I just did English, but that's a question.
It's a good issue. It's a good issue. In all the South American countries, one of the huge problems is corruption. Especially in the public institutions, we can find a lot of cases and examples. That's why we are very, very demanding with our public enterprises. The difference is that the state, the different institutions of the state, and the public enterprises. We have public enterprises where those enterprises manage the natural resources, hydrocarbons, mining, and so on. So we have created a ministry which is in charge of corruption, or fighting against corruption, which is in charge of all these institutions that have to report to this ministry, in order to clarify, to transparency everything in the process of licitations, sellings, buyings, and all what the public enterprises do in their activities. So it is very important, this issue. So far, we didn't have huge problems with the public enterprise because as everybody look at the public enterprises as the source of money for growth, for everybody benefit. So everybody is looking at what is going on with the public enterprises. We have a law that 2 times a year, the public enterprises, all the public enterprises in Bolivia, have to go a public report for what they are doing, show the figures of the enterprise, they have to, twice a year, everybody has access to all the information about the public enterprise. That's the way we are facing. And also, a more practical issue, when an enterprise or any public entity wants to buy something, we are introducing an electronic subasta, ¿cómo se dice? Auction. An electronic auction. So it has reduced a lot. The Ministry of Economy and Public Finance reported me 2 weeks ago that we save money more than 300 million using this kind of electronic auctions. So it's more transparent. It's immediately because everybody, let's say the state wants to buy paper. We put it in the web. We want to buy 100 blocks of paper, whatever. And everybody puts the offers there. And immediately you know who wants this buying. Immediately, very transparent. So we save a lot of money, and we did a more transparent process in my country. We are introducing in every buying and activities of the public sector. So we are improving the transparency, which is very useful and is in line with your worry. I think that's the way we can face the problem, transparency.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your talk, for your time, and hope to see you again at the Jackson School of Global Affairs. So thank you very much to the audience and the questions. Thank you.
Lo felicito, señor presidente. Muchas gracias.
Lo felicito.